All right, let's open up a truly chilling case file today. We're looking at the 1987 Gandhinagar haunting in Delhi. Supernatural stories usually put all the focus on the entity itself, but today we're going to look at this strictly through the lens of a mother's desperate, terrifying struggle to protect her kids. We'll reconstruct the events chronologically and, as you'll see, uncover a really dark secret hidden right inside the walls of a seemingly ordinary rented house. Okay, let's dive into this. Just imagine for a second that you're a mother. You're isolated in a brand new home, and your 4-year-old child looks up at you with just absolute terror in his eyes and asks, "Mom, how did he come? He will take us with him." That wasn't a nightmare. That was the literal, terrifying reality for Sarthak's mother. To understand how she ended up in this waking nightmare, we really need to look at the circumstances that trapped her there in the first place. So, Sarthak's father, Ramesh, worked for the railways. He was initially stationed about 1,500 kilometers away from his village in West Bengal, before moving the whole family out to Delhi. For Sarthak's mother, this meant being completely uprooted and dropped into this massive, unfamiliar, bustling city. Her husband was constantly out for work, which left her, totally alone in a strange house, trying to care for a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. This profound isolation is absolutely crucial to understanding the heavy psychological toll of what was about to happen. Let's walk through the architecture of this house like an investigator would, because it's important. To even use the bathroom, Sarthak's mother had to leave her kids upstairs and go all the way down to the landlord's area. Upstairs, the family was cramped into a single room with a makeshift kitchen. But right next door, sharing the exact same isolated first-floor corridor, was a room that the landlord kept permanently locked. The very design of this living space, it essentially forced the family into a constant state of vulnerability. And honestly, before the terror even began, there were glaring red flags. The rent was suspiciously cheap for Delhi, and the elderly landlord demanded a 2-month advance right up front. But the biggest one? Sarthak's aunt, who lived nearby, explicitly warned Ramesh that people just didn't stay in that room for long. But Ramesh, he was a practical guy. He justified the cheap rent and being close to his sister as logical wins. He completely dismissed the warnings and, inadvertently locked his own family in a cage. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because this wasn't a haunting that waited months to reveal itself. The degradation of their safety was terrifyingly fast. For the first few days, the mother just felt this lingering, heavy, kind of suffocating unease. But by day 5, she actually saw a shadow walk past their curtain and slip right into that mysteriously locked room. By day 6, the haunting escalated from just shadows to direct interaction with her children, and by day 8 or 9, the entity turned physically violent. Let's go back to day 6 for a second. Sarthak ran to his mother screaming that a strange woman was upstairs with his baby brother. Now, like a lot of parents, Sarthak's mother used to tell her kids innocent, cultural ghost stories about the how. A boogeyman who takes misbehaving kids, mostly just to get them to eat their dinner. But when she rushed upstairs and saw her 2-year-old sitting on the bed, staring into empty space and laughing like someone was playing with him, the terrifying realization hit her. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't a story anymore. The how was literally in her house. And as if the visual horror wasn't enough, the auditory terror was completely paralyzing. One evening while she was making dinner, she heard a really distinct knock on the window. But here's the absolute kicker. They were on the first floor. That window opened up to a sheer, straight drop right into a narrow back alley. There is no human way someone could have knocked on it. When she froze in terror, the knock was followed by this vicious, angry, guttural growl that literally vibrated through the glass. Perhaps the most insidious part of this entire case file is the psychological horror. Sarthak's mother was being actively hunted, yet she was entirely dismissed by the men around her. When she told her husband about the shadows, he just waved it off, telling her she was imagining it. When she confronted the elderly landlords about the impossible entity, they tremblingly suggested Sarthak must have seen the cat. She wasn't just fighting a ghost. She was fighting the devastating gaslighting or being told her reality wasn't real. Well, that gaslighting came to an abrupt end on a Sunday morning. Sarthak's mother was cooking, her back turned to the bed where the boys were lying down. Suddenly, 4-year-old Sarthak was violently thrown off the mattress. He hit the floor crying, shouting, "Mom, you pushed me!" That's the moment the psychological haunting shattered into a horrifying, undeniably physical assault against a child. As she rushed over to calm her hysterically crying son, the entity made its intentions perfectly crystal clear. Leaning in close, the mother heard a woman's voice whisper directly into her ear. It wasn't a moan, it wasn't a vague creak. It was a clear, calculated threat. "Get out of here, or I'll kill everyone."
Driven by pure, primal, maternal instinct, she just grabbed Sarthak and ran for the stairs to escape. But as she started going down, an unseen force violently shoved her right from behind. She tumbled down the concrete steps, desperately twisting her body to try and shield her son from the brunt of the fall. Sarthak still ended up suffering a bleeding head injury. And adding absolute insult to severe injury, when the father heard the commotion and saw the blood, he coldly scolded his wife, claiming she just couldn't handle a child properly. No way, right?
And this brilliantly illustrates the moment that skepticism, holding the family back, finally shattered. It was that same evening. Sarthak's father stayed back alone in the room to write a letter. Suddenly, he heard that same impossible knock on the first-floor window. Believing it was just a common thief, he grabbed a stick and confidently threw back the curtain. But it wasn't a thief. He found himself face to face with a terrifying girl, her eyes completely wide, just floating in midair outside a window with a sheer drop below. Staring right at the terrified father, the spirit, with her hair partially covering her horrifying face, delivered her final ultimatum. "Do you want to get out of here alive, or I'll kill everyone?" Needless to say, the father's pragmatism evaporated instantly. He immediately locked the room, fled to his sister's house with his family, and the very next morning demanded the landlord cancel their lease. So the family escaped with their lives, moving to a new home shortly after. But as we continue to investigate this case, we have to ask the obvious questions. What was the root cause of this insanely aggressive haunting? What dark secret was hiding inside that locked room right next to where the family slept? While by digging into the history of the neighborhood, the terrifying truth finally came to light. It turns out the landlord's whole "my son is in the US" story was a complete fabrication. That locked room actually belonged to the landlord's 22-year-old daughter. She had fallen deeply in love, but her parents rigidly, stubbornly refused to let her marry him. Devastated, the young woman tragically committed suicide right there in that exact room. But it gets worse. Driven by bruised ego and familial pride, the parents actually refused to perform her proper last rites, effectively trapping her tormented, angry spirit within those four walls. But here is the most absolutely sickening piece of evidence in this entire case file. Sarthak wasn't the first child this entity attacked. The neighbors ended up revealing that a few months prior, another family lived there. Their young boy was just flying a kite on the roof when he was suddenly pushed over the railing. Before he died from severe head injuries in the hospital, he explicitly stated that someone had pushed him. The landlord knew. He knew his house was lethal. Sarthak's mother's fierce instincts saved her children from a fatal drop, but it really highlights a horrifying intersection of human deceit and paranormal terror. Which brings us to the ultimate question of this case file. When a family's ego denies a tragic daughter her final peace, trapping her restless spirit, who is the real monster here? The angry ghost haunting the halls, or the landlord who knowingly rented out a slaughterhouse to young, unsuspecting families just to make a quick buck? It is a chilling thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.
Welcome to today's explainer. We're stepping right into the shoes of paranormal investigators to dissect a genuinely chilling case file from 1987 set in Gandhinagar, Delhi. We're going to reconstruct the absolute psychological terror experienced by one isolated family. What makes this so compelling is that we're looking at it through the recounted memories of their eldest son, Sarthak, who was just 4 years old at the time. This isn't just your standard ghost story about things going bump in the night. It is a meticulously documented 9-day descent into an absolute supernatural nightmare.
To really set the stakes for our investigation, we're actually going to start right at the terrifying climax. Get out of here, or I'll kill everyone. Imagine hearing that. This was a completely disembodied threat, violently whispered directly into the ear of a trapped, terrified mother. How in the world does a family, just looking for a fresh start in a brand new city, end up facing a malicious, unseen entity demanding their lives?
Well, to truly grasp this family's terror, we have to talk about the pressure cooker effect. The mother in our case file was under immense psychological stress even before things got weird. She had just uprooted her life, relocating 1,500 kilometers from West Bengal to Delhi. Her husband, Ramesh, was working these incredibly long hours, leaving her totally alone with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old toddler. She was essentially trapped in a strange, unfamiliar house. Her mental and emotional state was already vulnerable, right? And that makes what happens next so much more harrowing.
Now, Ramesh, the father, was a very practical guy. He worked for the government railway.
But he made a fatal miscalculation by only looking at the pros. The rent was incredibly cheap, and the house was conveniently right behind his sister's place. But man, he completely ignored some glaring red flags. The landlord demanded 2 months' rent in advance, which was super unusual for the time. Upstairs, right across from the room they'd be staying in, was a permanently locked door. And even more damning, Ramesh's own sister warned him not to move in. She told him she'd heard terrible rumors about the property. But Ramesh, being driven purely by logic, just waved it off.
Think about the physical layout of this place, because it's practically a masterclass in isolation. The mother was left entirely vulnerable. They were up on the first floor, and right across the corridor was that mysterious, locked room. There was no bathroom or kitchen upstairs, meaning she had to constantly go down to the ground floor, either leaving the kids unprotected or trying to cook near the open corridor. And the elderly landlords, they were tucked far away on the ground floor. So physically, whenever Ramesh was at work, she was completely cut off from any immediate help.
The really crucial point here is the timeline. The shockingly rapid escalation of this haunting. As investigators, timelines are everything, and we're anchoring their terrifying descent into madness in stark, factual reality. This wasn't some slow burn over months, no way. This family went from unpacking boxes to literally running for their lives in just 9 days. So let's break down exactly how this escalation happened, phase by phase.
Phase 1. Watched in the shadows.
Let's examine the subtle early warning signs that began messing with the mother's mind while she was isolated. By day 5, that initial unease definitely shifts into creeping paranoia. She's cooking dinner near the corridor, and she sees a distinct shadow pass right across the curtain, heading straight for that permanently locked room. She checks it out, but no one's there. Later on, she's napping with her kids in the afternoon, and she wakes up to the undeniable sensation of an invisible hand slowly, gently pulling the blanket completely off her body. These are deeply invasive, claustrophobic moments. She realizes her private, safe space is entirely compromised.
Seriously, put yourself in her shoes for a second. You're alone with 2 toddlers, your husband is super skeptical and keeps telling you you're just imagining things because you're stressed from the move. How would you rationalize these impossible events? The mother tried her best to brush it off, but her intuition was screaming at her that they were being watched by something unseen. And unfortunately, her instincts were dead right.
Phase 2. The children's unseen guest. Now we shift to what is probably the most chilling turning point in the whole case file, because spirits, as we often see in these types of investigations, tend to target the most vulnerable first. We have to contrast the mother's quiet, hidden fears with the raw, undeniable terror of her child. "Mom, how did he come? He will take us with him." That's a direct quote from 4-year-old Sarthak. He comes running downstairs while his mom is washing clothes, absolutely hysterical. He's pointing upstairs, utterly convinced that a monster, a How, has gotten into the room to take him away. This is not just a child's overactive imagination, okay? This is the pure panic of a kid watching an entity reveal itself in broad daylight.
And right alongside Sarthak's panic, we have this deeply unsettling scenario. When the terrified mother rushes upstairs, she finds Sarthak's 2-year-old brother. But he isn't crying, he's just sitting on the bed, looking straight ahead, and giggling, laughing and interacting with literally empty space. It looked exactly as if someone was sitting right in front of him, playing with him. The mother didn't even hesitate. She instantly grabbed her kids and fled to her aunt's house.
Phase 3. Escalation to physical violence.
All that psychological dread we've been analyzing, it violently boils over here. Let's meticulously track the Sunday escalation, which was day 9. It's morning. Sarthak is suddenly, violently pushed off the bed by an invisible force. He cries out, "Mom, you pushed me." And as she tries to comfort him, she hears that bone-chilling whisper right in her ear, "Get out of here or I'll kill everyone." She grabs Sarthak, sprints for the corridor, and right as they reach the top of the stairs, an invisible force violently shoves the mother from behind. They plummet down the concrete stairs, leaving little Sarthak with a bleeding head wound. This completely proves that this was no longer a trick of the mind. It was a targeted, malicious, and potentially lethal assault.
So, even after the stairs incident, Ramesh remains stubbornly logical. He sends his family to the aunt's house, but stays back alone to write a letter. Suddenly, the air in the room just grows heavy. He pulls back the curtain of a window facing an inaccessible back alley. And folks, this is his terrifying moment of reckoning. His skepticism is shattered into a million pieces. Standing outside a second-story window, literally floating in midair, is a girl with wide, dead eyes, hair covering her face. She looks right into his eyes and repeats the threat.
Do you want to get out of here alive, or I'll kill everyone? Ramesh dropped everything, locked the door, and the family vacated the house the very next morning.
The hidden case file, uncovering the dark secret. But as investigators, our job isn't done just because the family made it out. To really wrap up our case, we have to uncover the tragic motive here. What was the landlord so desperately trying to keep hidden from this innocent family? Consider the number 22. That represents the age of the landlord's daughter. It grounds all the supernatural chaos we've just explored into a very real, very human tragedy. Through asking around the neighborhood, the family's aunt finally unearthed the grim history of that first-floor corridor.
The catalyst for this entire haunting? It was forbidden love. The 22-year-old daughter wanted to marry a man, but her father outright refused. The heartbreaking action is that the daughter committed suicide right there, in that permanently locked room upstairs. But the consequence? That is where the true horror lies. Out of a bruised ego and deep shame, the parents refused to perform proper last rites for their daughter. Because of this, local lore states her spirit became trapped, angry, and fiercely territorial of that upstairs floor. We even discovered from the source material that a previous tenant's child was pushed off the roof to his death just months prior.
It's just incredibly heavy to think about. The landlord's pride literally created a pressure cooker of supernatural rage. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. If a tragedy is silenced simply to protect a family's pride, does the pain ever truly vanish, or does it fester into something monstrous that preys on the innocent? The Gandhinagar case file really shows us that buried secrets and unresolved grief have a dangerous, undeniable cost. Thank you so much for joining me to decode this incredible case file today. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and we'll see you in the next explainer.